Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast. I'm your host, Chanelle Nielsen, and I'm joined today by Danie Gohr from the Catch This Mama podcast. How are you, Danie?
I'm doing so well. Thanks for having me tonight.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. I've listened to your podcast and it is a great podcast. So if you guys have not checked that out, you'll want to take a listen. And Danie just is a lot of fun and brings a lot of energy and positivity to the show. So I'm sure she's going to do that for us today. So I'm excited for this chat. So to start off with, I love the name of your podcast, Catch This Mama, because there's a whole backstory there about running and kind of your personal struggles and things that you went through. So can we start off there and tell us just a little bit about, you're a mom of three. Tell us a little about your family now, and then kind of your backstory, how you came up with that and what that means to you, Catch This Mama.
Sure, totally. So right now, I am a mom to three beautiful little girls, ages 5, 3, and 1. And I'm married to a saint. He's a wonderful man. And I'm so blessed. I've had the opportunity this past year to be home with them and really dive into Catch This Mama. So that's been fun. So life is wonderful right now, but I'll say it wasn't always, so wonderful. I grew up with kind of a lot of turmoil in my life and lived with what I kind of say is a lot of harsh realities at a young age. I often felt like the adult in my household. And when you're a kid, you don't know any different, which is great. I would say up until a few years ago, I thought my childhood was pretty great. I had great friends, great sports, great grades. In college, I graduated in 3 years. I was living my health degree to what I thought was, that T. I was married at 21. Like we already discussed, I had 3 kids before I was 30. I had a career I was devoted to. And so on the outside, I appeared to always have it all together. Everything was going the way it was supposed to. But the reality was I was just a really great runner. And I always had a plan B before I gave plan A a shot. If times got tough, I would just run. Didn't like my job, I'd switch. Or, if my relationships were on the rocks, I'd just avoid it altogether for months. So for me, Catch This Mama was the fact that I needed to stop running. And so it all came crashing down when I lost my job in 2015. And I really had nowhere to run at that point but home. And so I specifically remember that day, actually a few weeks into losing my job, I was sitting on my couch where I had been really sulking the whole afternoon. And my husband came in and said, "Darn it, Danie," held on to me tightly and said, "I'm proud of you regardless. It's not that, he expected perfection." And he really didn't have to be there at that point. I was in a very pathetic state. I was numb. I was actually an emotional wreck in other ways. And so it was kind of at that moment where, he told me, "I'm proud of you," even when I thought, I was unlovable. And so it was at that point that I said, you know what, I had to face it all. My parents were both, this reality of me running, my parents were both addicts, and one in alcohol, one in the other in drugs. And so that was one thing I never wanted to face. I know that you've mentioned you had some disordered eating. I also suffered from an eating disorder that I call orthorexia, which, it's where you think that you have to eat so perfect all the time. I never skipped a meal, but I had that perfect mindset. And so long story short, what it comes down to is that I thought or despised people who used their experiences as a crutch. And so I thought that even if I was feeling things or taking a gut check, that I would be using it as a crutch. So that's kind of my backstory, is that I have been a runner my whole life until I couldn't run anymore.
That's so interesting. There's so much in there I want to unpack. To start off with, I want to ask you this. So when you were in that phase of your life, would you, if I had said, "Hey, Danie, how are things going?" or maybe you heard someone, let's say, talking about their running from their reality. If you heard this, would you be like, "Well, that's not me"? Or did you know?
I didn't know, because I never took a hot minute to say, to check how I was feeling. I just kind of always pushed things out of the, that feeling of what's really going on. I would push it out of the way altogether and just kind of upward and onward, thought that, what, you just got to move past these obstacles without ever actually facing them.
That makes sense. Yeah. So, okay, that's interesting because it took that really hard time to kind of stop and assess your life. And I think that that's huge because we just go sometimes. We just run without knowing where we're running to and without stopping to think of, wait, what path am I on? And is this where I want to be? And so it takes that introspection and that time to think about, what you're actually doing and realize where you want to be and where you want to be headed.
Yeah.
So.
And I feel like another key thing was that when you fall, that you had, for me specifically, I had somebody there, which happens to fortunately be my husband, who showed me that unconditional love and said, hey, you know what? You're okay. Just because this happened to you doesn't, define your outcome or who you are. So I think that personally makes me want to extend grace just to other people when they feel unlovable or when they've done something wrong.
That's huge. Yes. And I think that that's a big reason why we go through things in life is so that we can turn around and help other people who are going through those same things, that like, we get it. We've been there. We know what that's like. And so let me give you a hand up and see what I can do to help.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of what you did to stop running, because it's one thing to realize and to say, hey, I guess I've been kind of running from my problems. And I love how you phrased it. Always had a plan B before I gave plan A a shot. You can recognize sometimes that you're doing things, but then getting over it and changing your thought patterns, changing your behaviors is a whole different story. So how did you go from this realization and this light bulb moment to changing the course and the trajectory of your life?
Yeah. So there's that common saying that people always want change, but they don't always want to change. And it took a lot of, research and studying and almost, things like podcasts as a therapy to say, okay, let's look in. One thing that really stood out to me was this whole phrase of woundology, this whole thought process, I guess, is that
what is that? Woundology?
Yeah, woundology. So
I've never heard of that.
Yeah,
Okay.
you'll have to. I think her name is Cynthia Miss or something along those lines. Anyways, what she talks about is that when we have experiences in our life where things happen to us. So I talked about my parents being addicts, or even me losing a job. It would be so easy, and what most people do is to say, okay, I didn't deserve this. They did this to me. These experiences, poor me. And so you blame external factors for your wounds and so you're never able to heal. And so it's at the point where you can say, you know what? It's not everybody else. Okay. Even if it is, you still feel that a little bit. You say, but what could I do differently? And so how could I approach this situation just a little bit differently, or do better? And so that's not to be the victim always, but rather the thought process of what can I do better next time?
And that's so huge because I try to teach that to my children. Like, they say, oh, but so-and-so this, and, he did this and he did this. Yeah, but you can only control yourself. And I think we
Right.
know that. And as moms, that's probably some version of that we've all said to our kids, yeah, I'm sorry that kid's being mean, but you can only control you. And you can only, make your own choices, and you can't control him. And yet somehow it's easy to step, even as adults, into that victim role and to think like, but this happened to me, but this isn't fair. Well, sorry, it might not be, a lot of times it's not, but we don't have control over that. And so that's huge if we can realize that.
Totally. And that's why I love reading these like old school, these board books or the golden books, and the lessons. We typically as adults make things too complex. And as I read these little books for children with lessons, it's every single time I read one, I'm just sitting there at the end thinking, oh my gosh, I could apply this into my own life personally. We try to make these, like I said, complex issues, but really it comes down to simple things, treat others the way you want to be treated and things of that nature to really hit things home, show grace, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm hearing something that I just love, and that is that you are always learning, and I love it. You're talking about, you're listening to podcasts, or you're reading things, or you're reading a little golden book, and I think that that is so key. If you always have your antenna up for learning experiences and for new knowledge, because there's so many ways to learn and to get new insights if we're open to it. And I think that that is awesome that you are getting these messages from reading to your children. How often do I just like blah, 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 blah. I've read this book 100 times and I'm not really paying attention to what I'm reading. And, I'm not thinking there's a message in it for me. So I love it that you're staying curious even when you're reading to your kids. That's awesome. That's so
Yeah,
good.
I feel like so John Maxwell, I'm sure you've heard of him, if not read some of his wonderful books. I listened to his, I was listening via virtual, I guess, of this Live to Learn or Live to Lead conference he does each year. And he talked about how he interviewed or was around, he's a little bit older now and he openly admits that. And so he says, one thing I come across is that people stop learning when they get old. They get cranky and they stop learning. And so that's so true. I think as we get older, we kind of start to lose our empathy a little bit. And so you have to make that conscious effort to continue to learn and to continue to be empathetic towards other people and their experiences.
Yeah, empathy is a huge part of it. That's great. I'm glad you brought that in because, yeah, that's huge. And then continuing to learn and continuing to be open to new ideas and new ways of thinking is just really kind of a game changer there. Okay, so one of the things that really stands out in your backstory, and one of the things that I've read about you is you've had a lot of struggles. Things like orthorexia, you mentioned, infertility, your parents' divorce at a young age, and then addiction in your family. So, a lot of heavy things that you've had to deal with. So, I'm curious to know how this has affected you and how you've seen personal growth through all these struggles.
Sure. So I think at a very young age, I would say I'd never established a foundation of who I was. And so it was not until later in life where I kind of found my footings, I guess you could say, or felt comfortable in my own skin. So I think that along the way, stumble upon stumble and mistake upon mistake, I kind of was able to figure out what was important to me. I always say I was an early bloomer in achieving, but I was a late bloomer in achieving what was important in life. And so I finally have figured out that me and my husband, through whatever has come knocking on our door, we finally figured out that what, as long as we're able to struggle towards one another, we know we're going to be okay. And so that's kind of what we focus on.
I love that. That is huge. I think, you know, that's really what builds a good marriage, right? Because we're all going to have hard things. And so I love that idea of struggling together, because anything that you go through can bring you closer or further away, and not just from your spouse. I mean, from yourself, if that makes sense. Like, and I guess it really goes along with what you were saying. That's kind of what running means, right? You're running away from who you really are. You're running away from dealing with these problems and really running away from who you could have been if you went through those, if you experienced, if you felt all those
Yeah.
things. So, yeah, and I would also add, it also takes a, we can have that struggle together for those people, listeners who are like, well, I'm not, I'm not married right now, or whatever the situation may be. we can also struggle together with God. If
Totally.
if we're doing our struggles the right way, then it's going to bring us together with our true selves, with God, with our spouse, with others, instead of bringing us away from. So that's powerful. So talk to me also about all these struggles, how they have affected you as a mom.
Yeah, I just my girls are still young, so I think that establishing that foundation, and one of those the biggest foundations that you can lay is that trust and love for God. And so I think that establishing, someone once said on our podcast, and it's really stuck with me, is we keep crying out to know the will of God without realizing it's knitted into the fabric of our being. And so I think that that is what I try to instill in our children, is that your experience will shape who you are, both good and bad. And so if you can keep that outlook and know, like, how can I use this wound or this particular experience to be of service to somebody else, I think then you'll always be okay.
Yeah, for sure. So your kids are really young at this point, fairly young. So you probably aren't talking to them about, oh, mom has had to go through this and this and this, but you're probably just looking at how you're going to do it in a different way, or you're talking to them in a different way. Like, what do you think is different had you not had those experiences in the way you're raising your kids?
Sure. So I guess at this age, are you kind of asking, what am I doing right now?
Yeah. With your kids young. I mean, like, for example, I'll just bust in here and say, so my daughter is 14. And when she starts to say, like, oh, I don't, she worries about, she's really thin, so she doesn't worry that she's fat, like I was always worried about, but she worries about how she looks sometimes. And
Totally.
I answer her differently because of the way of what I've been through and with my own body image struggles and feeling things about myself. So I guess I'm wondering, what kind of things when your kids are so young, how is this influencing all these struggles you've been through, influencing your motherhood now when they're so young?
Yeah, so I see myself interjecting comments because my 5-year-old actually, she's only 5 and she has made comments, I don't love my curly hair, or I need to put makeup on so the boys will like me, and things of that nature, which I don't think that wasn't on my radar at 5 years old. But, they know without knowing. So I think that if you just continuously what I'm trying to do right now is just continuously show them love. I love your curly hair, or I love you. Your curly hair doesn't define you. What I love is your kindness and your love for God. And, then we transition into that. And so it's not that we're avoiding it, but we're just saying, hey, you know what? That's really not the most important thing. The most important thing is, what you are good at and what is beyond you.
That's so good, because what I hear you doing is really broadening her view. Like, yeah, your curly hair is beautiful, but so is this. And look beyond. Like, there's so much more to you than your beautiful curly hair. There's so much more.
Right.
And so I think that's huge if we can help our kids understand and see that. So one of the things that I really admire about you and thought was really interesting is that you wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, and you felt that calling to be home with your kids. And you felt that. And you talk about, it took a while to get there, but talk to me about what that felt like and that whole process of going from a career that you really enjoyed. Of course, as you mentioned, it wasn't your choice when it all happened.
Sure.
But you felt that. Talk to me about those feelings and what it was like for you leaving your kids, having that desire to stay home.
Yeah. So my mom was always a working mom. She had to be. She was a single mom. And so I always felt the tug, like, man, I don't know what it would be like to stay home. I felt that calling each day. On Sunday night, I never looked forward to Monday. And I would race out at 5 o'clock. And it never got easier as they grew. I just got really used to it. And so for me, that transition to go to stay home, it just really was what I needed to do. And I thank God for that. And it doesn't mean that I won't go back to work some point in time to a structured environment, but for that season of my life, it is what made the absolute most sense. And I kind of joked recently on my podcast that in 2017, I really quit everything. Like I quit work, I quit exercising, I quit my obligations and my commitments because I just really wanted to make sure that I did that gut check this last year to begin that more intentional life of, hey, you know what? My kids and God and my family are number one. And then let's build upon that after I've already, created a strong foundation with what's the most important thing. So
that for 2017, my word of the year was simplify. And so I went through kind of a similar process of just anything that's not the most important, it needs to go.
Right.
It needs to go, and I need to clear it out. And that's physical things, and that's emotional things, and that's things that I'm spending my time on, and really to spend the time to say, why? Why am I doing this? So that then what I am filling my life and my days with is the stuff that matters.
Yes, absolutely. Completely agree.
Yeah. It's just so easy to get caught up in, just doing stuff without thinking about it. And I think that is coming through a lot. You can tell the work that you've done to narrow it down to this point to like, okay, I'm doing what I need to do. And this is, what really matters. So tell us why you were interested in starting a podcast and some of the lessons from podcasting.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I absolutely love it. So I knew that, so I've always kind of done a casual blog. Like I did a food blog and I did, but I kind of saw this wave of podcasts. Moms are busy. We don't have a ton of time to read or to sit down or take time. But this was kind of a way, I knew that podcasting was a way that I was able to, catch up a little bit and nourish my soul when I had to do laundry or when I had to do a few other things. So I knew that was a route that I wanted to go. I didn't always, which is funny, to be honest, I didn't know what I was going to really podcast about until you get into it. I just kind of had this feeling that this is where I was supposed to go last year. And so I listened to that feeling and I went without all the answers. I'm not the most tech savvy person, so it took probably a lot longer for me to launch it. But once I launched it, it just kind of took off. And, you naturally reach out. And when you get a yes to guests to come on, you just, you feel like, yay, I can't wait to learn from this person. And so how much I've grown just from having my guests on has been, it sounds selfish, but it's just been so eye-opening. And each time I have, a chat like with you, I'm able to sit here and bring pieces from what I've learned from other people. And so I think that just having that insatiable thirst to keep, like we've talked about, to keep learning is why I continue to do the podcast.
Oh my gosh. That is I just have a huge smile on my face right now. That's just, I love it so much. That is how I feel totally, because this, in fact, the same way for me of coming to podcasting, I just felt like this is what you're supposed to do. And I hesitated to do it because a lot of reasons. It was scary. And like you said, the whole tech thing and a bunch to learn, but it was just the next step for me. And having these conversations, I mean, it's amazing. So I love it. I want to make sure that all my listeners know that Danie is doing all these conversations on her podcast at Catch This Mama, and that is a great place to go for inspiration and uplifting conversations. Danie always ends her podcast with a quote, and I didn't ask her ahead of time, but I assume she's got some great ones up her sleeve. So to end, I would love for you to tell us one of your favorite quotes.
Okay, you're going to have to give me a second. I'm so bad at this. Okay, hold on.
And if you have to paraphrase it, that's okay, because we put you on the spot, and I can go in later and, add it. So if anyone wants the actual quotes, they can read the show notes.
Sure. So let's narrow it, because I have this quotes, a million quotes rolling through my brain. So tell me again, what kind of quote? A quote to live by? A quote?
Oh, this is totally your call. You tell us which quote this is going to be.
Okay, sure. So I would
just
say,
whichever one is coming to mind.
yeah, and it's I think it's maybe overused or used a lot, but above our bed, I have a sign that says just be still and know. And obviously that's a biblical scripture. And I would say that is something. I'm not the type of person that needs a kick in the butt to get going. I'm the person that needs to say, okay, hold on a second, just take a hot minute and slow down. And so just the whole, be still and know, to realize what's more important, and that there is someone way bigger than me in this world. So.
Oh, that is a perfect quote. I love that one. Anything scriptural is great. So just be still and know. That's perfect. Well, Danie, thank you so much for being on the show and talking with us today. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to get to know you, and I look forward to listening to your podcast more in the future.
Awesome. And thank you, everyone, for listening to Moms Who Know. Thanks so much for listening. And if you love this episode and know of another mom who knows that when she takes care of herself, she can take better care of everyone else, please let her know about the podcast. It would mean the world to me if you would help me get this podcast out to as many listeners as I can. So if you liked what you heard, please take 30 seconds and leave me a 5-star review and share this with your friends. Join us next week for the next episode of Moms Who Know.